In the months since he'd arrived on Tatooine, his hair and beard had grown quickly, and his face and hands had turned nut brown. In his soft boots and long robe, its cowl raised over his head, no one would have taken him for a former Jedi, let alone a master who had sat in the High Council. In any case, Tatooine wasn't a world where questions were asked. Residents wondered, and they gossiped and theorized, but they rarely inquired about the reasons that brought strangers to remote Tatooine. Coupled with the fact that the world was still largely under the sway of the Hutts, the prevailing frontier etiquette had made Tatooine a refuge for criminals, smugglers, and outlaws from star systems galaxy-wide. Months earlier, when he and Anakin had been in pursuit of clues they'd hoped would lead them to Darth Sidious, Obi-Wan had told Anakin that he could think of far worse places to live than Tatooine, and he still felt that way. He took in stride the ubiquitous sand that had so rankled Anakin. Tatooine's double sunset skies were always a marvel to behold, and the isolation suited him. All the more because Anakin had been subverted by Palpatine, and for a brief time had served this new emperor. Given everything that had happened since, the one image Obi-Wan knew he would never be able to erase from his memory was that of Anakin, Darth Vader as Sidious had dubbed him, kneeling in allegiance to the Dark Lord after having gone on a murderous spree in the Jedi Temple. If there was a second image, it was of Anakin burning on the shore of one of Mustafar's lava flows, cursing him. Had he been wrong to let Anakin die there? Could he have been redeemed as Padme had believed to the last? These were questions that plagued him and pained him more deeply than he would ever have thought possible. And now, all these months later, here he was on Tatooine, Anakin's homeworld, watching over Anakin's infant son, Luke. Obi-Wan's reason for living. Watching from afar, at any rate. Today was as close as he had come to the child in weeks. Just across the street, Luke sat in a front carrier worn by Beru while she purchased sugar and blue milk. Neither she nor her husband Owen was aware of Obi-Wan's presence on the cantina veranda, his vigilant though covert gaze. As Obi-Wan brought the water glass to his mouth and sipped, a holo-net news report caught his ear and he swung to the cantina's display, simultaneous with a torrent of static that interrupted the feed. What was she saying? Obi-Wan asked a human seated 2 tables away. "Band of Jedi were killed on Kashyyyk," the man said. Close to Obi-Wan's age, he wore utilities of the sort, affected by docking bay workers in Mos Eisley spaceport. Had the holo-net reporter been referring to Jedi who'd been on Kashyyyk with Yoda? No, Obi-Wan realized, when the feed suddenly returned. The reporter was talking about more recent events. About Jedi who had obviously survived Order 66 and been discovered on Kashyyyk. He continued to listen, growing colder and colder inside. The Empire had accused Kashyyyk of plotting rebellion. Thousands of Wookiees had died. Hundreds of thousands more had been imprisoned. Obi-Wan squeezed his eyes shut in dismay. He and Yoda had recalibrated the temple beacon to warn surviving Jedi away from Coruscant. What could the ones discovered on Kashyyyk have been thinking, banding together like that, drawing attention to themselves instead of going to ground as they had been ordered to do? Did they think they could gather enough strength to go after Palpatine? Of course they did, Obi-Wan realized. They hadn't realized that Palpatine had manipulated the war, that a Sith occupied the throne, that like everyone else, the Jedi had failed to grasp a truth that should have been evident years earlier. The Republic had never been worth fighting for. The ideals of democracy hadn't been stamped out by Palpatine. The Jedi had carried out missions of dubious merit for any number of Supreme Chancellors, but always in the name of safeguarding peace and justice. What they had failed to understand was that the Senate, the Coruscanti, the citizens of countless world and star systems, grown weary of the old system, had allowed democracy to die. And in a galaxy where the goal was single-minded control from the top, and where in the end justified the means, the Jedi had no place. That had been the final revenge of the Sith. When Obi-Wan lifted his gaze, the intermittently garbled holo-net was displaying an image of someone outfitted in what almost seemed a costume of head-to-toe black. Human or humanoid, the being species wasn't mentioned. The masked Imperial had apparently played a role in tracking down and executing the insurrectionist Jedi and enslaving their Wookiee confederates. The burst of static that accompanied the reporter's mention of the figure's identity might have surged from Obi-Wan's brain. Still chilled by the earlier announcement about the Jedi, he was now paralyzed by sudden dread. He couldn't have heard what he thought he heard. He whirled to the spaceport worker. What did she say? Who is that? Lord Vader, the man said, all but into his glass of brandy. Obi-Wan shook his head. No, that's not possible. You didn't ask if I thought it was possible, Sandman. You asked me what she said. Obi-Wan stood up in a daze, knocking over his table. Hey, take it easy, friend, the man said, rising. Vader, Obi-Wan muttered. Vader's alive. The cantina's other customers turned to regard him. Get a hold of yourself, the man told Obi-Wan under his breath. He called for the cantina owner. Pour him a drink, a real one, and put it on my tab. Riding the table, he urged Obi-Wan back into his chair and lowered himself onto an adjoining one. The cantina owner brought the drink and set it down in front of Obi-Wan. Is he all right? He's fine, the man from Mos Eisley said. Aren't you, friend? Obi-Wan nodded. Heat stroke. The cantina owner seemed satisfied. I'll bring you some more water. Obi-Wan's new friend waited until they were alone to say, You really all right? Obi-Wan nodded again. Really? The man adopted a conspiratorial voice. You want to remain all right. You'll keep your voice down about Vader, understand? You'll keep from asking questions about him too, even in this Force-forsaken place. Obi-Wan studied him. What do you know about him? Just this. I have a friend, a trader in Hardwoods, who was on Kashyyyk when the Imperials launched their attack on a place called Kashyyyk. I guess he was lucky to get his ship raised and jumped. But he claims he got a glimpse of this guy Vader ripping into Wookiees like they were stuffed toys and going to lightsabers with the Jedi who were on world. The spaceport worker glanced furtively around the cantina. This Vader, he toasted Kashyyyk, friend. From what my friend says, it'll be years before a piece of Rocher goes up the well. And the Wookiees, Obi-Wan said. The stranger shrugged forlornly. Anyone's guess. Placing a few credits on the table, he stood up. Take care of yourself. These desert wastes aren't as remote as you may think they are.